everything's painful. My whole body's painful from the spine to the hip to the shoulder. I can barely walk. At this, where I was at in that stage, if you continued that out, it looked like I was going to be dead in 5 years.
Today, I'm talking with Troy Malone out of Portland, Oregon. He's going to be talking with us about his experience with hip impingement surgery. Years ago, he was told that his hip pain was a result of bad bone shapes and that the only solution was to get hip surgery. He didn't really want to get the surgery, but he did. He ended up getting it, and in this interview, he's going to share what happened. He's going to share what the aftermath was. He's going to share what he learned from his surgeons after the surgery was already completed. If you or somebody you know is considering hip surgery for FAI, it's really important for you to listen to this interview. I hope you find it helpful. Here we go. All right, Troy, thank you so much for joining us from Portland to talk with us about your hip impingement experience and your hip surgery and all that. So I want to start from the beginning. Can you talk about kind of the onset of symptoms and what you saw happening to your body that eventually led you to hip surgery?
Sure. I've always been pretty active, younger, kind of high school stuff, played sports, football, baseball, basketball. Into my 20s, I got into rock climbing, surfing, kind of mountain biking and hiking, a little more of those extreme sports, snowboarding and things like that. I didn't see much restriction until, like I said, the 30s. I started not being able to bring my knee to my chest. So I noticed it first in climbing. I was limited on my hip mobility to kind of put a high foot up. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd go to like move or roll over, and the snap would happen and I would just scream in the middle of the night. And
oh my gosh.
My wife would be like, what? I started with a bit of a PT approach initially, where they were looking at physical therapy, but they quickly looked at me and said, oh my gosh, you're really bad. I think you need to see a surgeon. And the surgeon said, hey, here's what's going on with your body. You have hip impingement. You have bone spurs on your hip. You have a torn labrum. The good news is that we can do a surgery where we shave off the bone spurs off your femur and clean it up, and then you'll move freely. You'll have free range of motion. You'll have free restricted movement. When you hear someone give you a solution and you're in this scared state, it's your mind wants to really take that solution.
So obviously the solution sounds great. The surgery always sounds really good.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Before I touch on that, there's another warning sign that was a big like light bulb that went off. Was my left hip. I don't have much pain, but I have the same restriction. Like some of the movements are restricted. Does my left hip have this as well?
Okay.
So turns out my left hip was worse on the imaging. So I was like, whoa, wow. So this was genetic or something? Like both hips were really bad. They said, yeah, your left hip's worse. We should operate on both of them.
Okay.
I was like, cool. Can we do them both at once? And they wouldn't do that. But why am I able to do these movements on this side and not on the right side if the left side's worse on imaging?
Right.
And they said, imaging, like based on imaging, we might not, when you get in there, it could be a little different was kind of the answer. So we might not know specifically within imaging exactly, but we can tell that the imaging's worse on the left than the right.
Okay.
But it was my first, light bulb kind of moment where it did get me thinking, okay, that really wasn't the answer that I wanted. There wasn't right. to that. So, but I ignored it. And I ended up having this surgery in 2015. On the right hip, and I had the left hip scheduled for later.
What happened with the right hip after surgery, in the month after, in the 3 months after? What did you notice?
They said that based on when we get in there and look at your hip, we might need to do this procedure called microfracture. And,
okay.
I was crossing my fingers. Hopefully I don't get microfracture. I wake up Turns out they did microfracture. You basically sign that away and give the surgeon the right to do it. And rightfully so, that they potentially know. So it turns out she got into the hip and it was incredibly worse than she thought. So about that 3-month period, I really noticed that my hip was frozen. Like there wasn't any movement. And so we'd work on relaxation and a little bit of massage, things to try to relax it, but the muscles were guarding, but the hip was starting to get frozen. And what I think it did for me, and I would say for people listening, be careful with this, because I think it acted like a glue, and it essentially glued my femur to my acetabulum. And so when I went to move, the pelvis would move, but the femur wouldn't move.
What kind of recovery timeline did the surgeon give you?
They kept saying, a lot of people get better, at that year mark. So I wasn't that worried. They were really reassuring to me.
Okay.
I felt like I was in good hands. Down the rabbit hole of seeing the rheumatologist and putting me on like an Advil twice a day or ibuprofen twice a day. And then they wanted to put me on even a higher anti-inflammatory type drug, which caused a lot of other problems. Like at this point, Matt, like it was hard to move and painful to move. So I was sitting a lot more. Everything was painful.
Oh, no.
Painful to move.
Okay.
So at the 3-month appointment follow up with the surgeon again, I show up, but the surgeon walks in, no idea who I was.
Oh.
No idea about our previous conversation, pulls me up on the chart, like is trying to gather information on the chart. And I can see this going on, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what? Yeah. And then left and said, hey, I think you do have an autoimmune disorder. Keep seeing the rheumatologist. I think your next thing is a hip replacement. I'm sorry. That was dark. That was brutal. Now at this point, everything's painful. My whole body's painful from the spine to the hip to the shoulder to I can barely walk. At this, where I was at in that stage, if you continued that out, it looked like I was going to be dead in 5 years.
So you started seeing the long picture on this. You applied it to your body. You're thinking long term, this is not working. So how did you end up? You ended up coming to Upright Health. You found us somehow, and you started thinking that it might be a good idea to move your body again. What got you thinking that way?
Yeah, it started the FAI Fix, amazing program. It really opened my eyes to what your musculature can do to fix your bone. It really, for the first time, gave me the sense of like, there's a skeletal system, and does that skeletal system move on its own?
Right.
Yeah, and it was like a freaking light bulb ding moment of like, oh my gosh, muscles do move the bones. We have to get these muscles firing. Like the objective here is the right muscles have to fire in order for you to get better, or at least get this range of motion back.
Was there one strategy that you found really, really helpful in waking up some of your hip muscles?
Yeah, kind of finding the balance of strengthening or activating muscles, especially the right muscles. I've said this a lot, like another aha moment for me was that, a tight muscle could be a weak muscle. That right. I didn't really get that. And I think for people listening, just because something is restricted and super tight and painful, I've come to realize now, like what that pain, like the pain sensation of a weak muscle is different than a tight muscle. And, the more you dive into the body and body awareness, you kind of pick up on what a tight muscle and the way your body reacts to a weak muscle. The good thing with that is you can strengthen a weak muscle. If you can get that muscle firing again.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a good learning piece. I actually have an article on the website, which we'll put in the show notes, a link to that in the show notes. Basically talks about how you deal with tight muscles and how to think about those, right? Because the conventional approach in massage and personal training and PT, the way everybody looks at it is if it feels tight, it's a muscle that you need to loosen and stretch. And that may work for some situations, but like you're saying, if you don't have the strength or that muscle is just really weak, it can still feel tight. And loosening it is not going to do anything. And it certainly won't fix your problem.
And I will say, Matt, it gets easier. You know, I think as this journey progresses, it's been a wild run for me. I mean, that was 2015, and we're well into 2021 now. Yeah, and so I think for me, it's taken a long time, and maybe it took me longer to figure out certain key pieces of the journey, which I think for a lot of people, you know, if you know the right steps, I think you can fix it a lot quicker.
So people listening know, you know, what's your function like now versus before the surgery and versus right after the surgery? What are your hips able to do? What are you proud of? You know, what are you blown away by right now?
I'm still restricted. I'm working out of pain. Like, on a positive note, you know, I can walk 10 miles with my dog. I can go on a 10-mile hike. Almost pain-free, if not in that like 2 pain range. Whereas I couldn't walk to the park. Another kind of cool thing is one of the PTs they were very obsessed with my imaging, and really took imaging strong. So we analyzed my imaging, and they basically said, Troy, there's zero way that you can have more than 70 degrees of hip flexion.
There's no way you can have more than 70. Wow. Okay.
There's zero way, based on your bone shapes, there's zero way that you can physically have the shape. You're going to run into an impingement. And so I'm sorry to tell you that, but there's just no way. I'm past that now. I have more range of motion than that in my hip. So,
oh Lord.
I'm proud of that. Like, to me, that blows that theory out of the water.
Yeah.
Completely. So hey, if I can have more than 90, I think that I can have full range of motion. I had a ton of help along the way. Thank you guys so much. I'm incredibly grateful for Upright, for Shane, for Mitch. You guys all, incredibly thank you. You know, everyone that's put information out there in this world, thank you so much, because you guys give so many people hope. And I know there's more people like me. So thank you guys so much.
That's awesome. Your story is super inspiring, and I hope that people who are listening get a lot out of it. That's going to do it for today, guys. I hope you got a lot of helpful information here. And I hope you always remember that pain sucks. Life shouldn't. All right, I hope you found that interview really helpful and inspiring. I'm going to leave links in the show notes so you can find Troy and you can find the FAI Fix program, which will help you help yourself out of hip pain, especially if you have the FAI diagnosis. If you liked this video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, share this with somebody you know who's going through this decision-making process about hip surgery for FAI. And as always, I hope you remember that pain sucks, life shouldn't.